I find it fascinating how the tran of a video can sometimes reveal unexpected and even shocking truths. You might see, buried in the comments, a stark observation about human carelessness in the face of danger. A simple unzipped tent, for example, becoming an open invitation to a venomous snake. It makes you wonder about the stories hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. Today, I want to share one of those stories with you. A terrifying incident that unfolded on a palm tree farm in Indonesia. It was July 21st, 2016, near Palankaraya. The morning arrived quiet and humid, the air thick with the memory of the previous night's rain. But by evening, a tragedy would occur, sending ripples of shock through the entire community who worked there. The victim was Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old farm advisor from Britain. He was known as a quiet, diligent man, dedicated to improving the farm's water systems for optimal palm tree growth. I'm told he always carried a small notebook where he would jot down observations and problems as he walked the grounds. Reggie had only been in Indonesia for 4 months, but in that time, he'd amassed a collection of photographs documenting the local wildlife. He seemed particularly fascinated by the creatures around the farm. Unlike the other workers, Reggie wouldn't try to scare away the snakes or lizards. Instead, he would kneel down, studying them with an almost childlike curiosity. On that particular day, Reggie set out to inspect the water ditches, a crucial task with the rainy season fast approaching. He carried his notebook, measuring tape, and his phone, ready to record his findings. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, spotted Reggie near a muddy ditch, kneeling and writing. They jokingly warned him about the giant snakes rumoured to inhabit the water channels. Reggie simply laughed, expressing his desire to see one of these mythical creatures up close. The workers later recounted that he seemed completely unfazed by their warnings, dismissing them as mere folklore. The palm farm was vast, a seemingly endless expanse of palm trees separated by narrow water channels. The ground, saturated from the recent rain, was soft and muddy, making some areas treacherous. Dragonflies danced over the water, while mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were the distant drone of chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs in the ditches. The heat hung heavy, creating an atmosphere of stillness. This region is home to reticulated pythons, some of the largest snakes on Earth. They can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over 200 pounds. These snakes are ambush predators, patiently waiting near water for unsuspecting animals like pigs or dogs. Though attacks on humans are rare in this part of Indonesia, the snakes have been increasingly drawn to areas where people work, driven by the destruction of their natural habitats. Local people knew the dangers and often carried long knives for protection when working near water. As late afternoon approached and Reggie failed to return to camp, Amir grew concerned and retraced his steps to the last place they had seen him. The farm was eerily silent, save for the incessant buzzing of insects. Then Amir saw something that sent a jolt of fear through him. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. Just a few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's midsection was grotesquely swollen, suggesting it had consumed a very large animal. Amir froze, then frantically called out for Luffy and the other workers. Within moments, 5 men stood there, fixated on the snake as it slowly began to move toward the bushes. The swollen bulge dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep impression in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, cautiously poking at the snake from a distance. The python responded with a loud hiss, opening its mouth wide to reveal its curved teeth, coiling defensively. The snake was truly massive, estimated to be around 15 feet long. None of the workers dared to approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately contacted the local police. While they waited, the men maintained a watchful vigil over the snake. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to subtly shift, as if something inside was moving. I've seen the aftermath of snake encounters, the fear they leave behind. I remember one case in particular, the story of Reggie, a farm worker. His disappearance was unsettling enough, but the discovery, that was something else. One of the other workers noticed a strange bulge in a large python, far too big to be any normal animal. The police were called, and they made the grim decision to kill the snake. It took several minutes, a chaotic scene of men striking the python with knives and poles. When they finally cut it open, they found Reggie's body inside, curled up and covered in slime. His notebook and phone, damaged but present, lay near the water's edge. It was a tragedy that led to new warnings, a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows. But the story that keeps me up at night is about Clare Johnson. It was March 15, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park, India. 2 travellers were asleep in a tent, unaware that a spectacled cobra had silently slipped inside. Claire, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Melbourne, had been dreaming of this trip for years. She'd saved meticulously, eager to photograph wild tigers and immerse herself in the world. She was known for her adventurous spirit, yes, but also for her careful planning. She researched every location, carried medical supplies, and kept a detailed blog for her family. I've always been struck by how quickly a moment of carelessness can turn into tragedy, especially when we venture into wild spaces. The story of Lara, the German backpacker, is a stark reminder. She sought the beauty of nature in Australia, but one night a venomous snake slithered into her tent, leading to her death. Her parents, contacted through the Australian Embassy, requested cremation according to local customs. The camp, choosing to remain open, began offering weekly talks by a snake expert. These talks aimed to educate guests on how to properly inspect their tents and utilize lighting to deter snakes at night. Lara eventually returned to Germany in memory only, but the story she unknowingly created lived on. She warned future backpackers through a detailed account published on a travel website, urging them to meticulously check their tents, bedding, and shoes in snake-prone areas. This post circulated quietly for years, a somber reminder to those who romanticized sleeping close to nature without understanding the inherent dangers. This incident underscores the critical importance of safety precautions when traveling in wilderness areas. Even seasoned travelers like Claire can encounter unforeseen dangers when humans and wildlife share the same habitat. Proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when exploring remote natural areas. Now let me tell you about Jorge Cruz. It was September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge was 42 and had worked in that orchard his entire life. Before sunrise, he would rise to check water systems, prune branches, and teach his eldest son how to assess the health of the fruit. The villagers knew Jorge as a dependable man, the kind who would repair broken carts and lend tools without expecting anything in return. He had a childhood habit of working barefoot, claiming it helped him feel the ground better and move faster when climbing the lower tree branches. That afternoon, the air was heavy with heat, and the sun beat down so intensely that everything seemed still. The orchard had belonged to his family for generations, but on this day, the ordinary routine would be shattered in a single moment. Jorge was working alongside two neighbors, Raul and Mateo, picking limes on the far side of the grove. There, workers had recently piled cut tree branches after cleaning the area. The three men joked about the heat as they moved among the low branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge, wearing his wide hat pushed back and a faded old shirt, reached for a low branch, shifting his weight to bring the fruit closer. The ground was hard dirt, covered with cut leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops cast long, shifting shadows. It was quiet, making small sounds like falling fruit or clothes brushing against bark easily audible. The men were focused on their work and conversation, unaware of the potential dangers lurking nearby. A type of poisonous snake called the Tercipelo bropsasper, locally known as the naka, thrives in Central America. These thick-bodied snakes typically grow to be 3 to 5 feet long. Their venom is incredibly potent, destroying skin and muscle, causing severe bleeding at the bite site, and disrupting blood clotting and blood press throughout the body. They blend seamlessly with fallen leaves, often remaining motionless until someone steps close. A bite typically causes excruciating pain and rapid swelling. That morning, neighbors had mentioned seeing more snakes due to recent rains. Jorge's wife had even urged him to wear boots while clearing brush and debris. The pile of cut branches where they were working was a perfect hiding spot for such snakes. Raul later recounted that he had warned Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. Then, as Jorge shifted his position, the snake struck. It burst from the leaves and bit the skin just above his ankle. Raul and Mateo heard a short, sharp cry of pain as Jorge recoiled, clutching at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him again. Dark blood stained the dirt where his foot had been. The pain was immediate and intense. He doubled over, dropping the fruit. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, the skin becoming bruised and discolored. He started vomiting, sweating profusely, and his face turned pale. Raul quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they fashioned a splint from a broom handle to immobilize Jorge's leg. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, pushing it toward the dirt road leading back to the village. The journey to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust coated Jorge's damp skin, and he grew confused, speaking incoherently and drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg, noting a weak pulse and low blood press. The clinic had basic medical supplies but lacked anti-venom, the crucial medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to contact the regional health centre, requesting assistance, but the nearest supply of anti-venom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition worsened. He became increasingly disoriented, his breathing shallow. The medical staff was helpless to improve his condition. By evening, despite their efforts to stop the bleeding and assist his breathing, Jorge had died at the clinic. Raúl said they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick plant life. I still think about Jorge sometimes, the man who died from the bite of those ants. His flip phone and work notebook were found, stained, and returned to his family. It wasn't long after that a travelling veterinarian came to the village, bringing a small supply of anti-venom. He taught the local people some basic emergency response, how to make splints, how to apply press bandages, and when to use tourniquets. The villagers cleaned up the brush pile where it happened, marking it clearly. They even put up a simple pole marker where Jorge had been bitten. His wife, she began wearing his wide-brimmed hat during harvest times, a constant, visible reminder. The lime trees, they kept producing fruit, and every harvest season since then has begun with a serious reminder to all the workers to be careful. It was May 2nd, 2018. The air over the Cross River felt heavy, still. Mina Belagan was 19. She had just returned from university a week earlier and spent most afternoons at the river. Everyone knew Mina for her lively spirit. She often brought her cousins to swim with her, even though the older villagers warned them about snakes being more active during the dry season. But Mina, she didn't think much of their warnings. She believed nothing dangerous ever happened in the shallow water. On that day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her for a swim. They left their sandals and shirts on the rocks before wading into the cool water. Mina was planning to go back to school soon. She talked about wanting to start a small community project, something to teach younger children how to swim safely. She had always seen the river as a place full of life, not danger. Because Mina felt so comfortable there, her cousins trusted her, followed her without a worry. It was one of those afternoons where every sound seemed to carry far. The river's surface looked calm, reflecting the cloudless sky. But the locals always said the water was never truly quiet. Something was always moving underneath. The part of the river they chose was wide and shallow, with muddy banks favoured by fishermen. The air was humid, and dragonflies hovered just above the surface. Even though it was a bright day, the thick plants on the other side cast long shadows over the deeper parts of the water. African rock pythons, the largest snakes on the continent, can grow to be more than 20 feet long. They hunt by staying perfectly still until an animal gets close, then striking with powerful jaws before wrapping their body around their prey, squeezing until it stops breathing. While attacks on people are rare, they're known to catch and eat goats, dogs, even large animals like antelopes. During the dry season, they often hunt near shrinking water sources, where animals come to drink. Earlier that week, an older fisherman had warned Mina's uncle that he'd seen a very large python lying in the sun on a log nearby. The children had been told not to swim until the rains came and raised the water levels. But Mina insisted that the shallow bend where they swam was safe. Mina had been in the water for almost an hour, playing and floating on her back, when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was just a tree branch caught in the current. But when it curved and moved silently across the water's surface, fear spread through the group. The shape moved quickly, revealing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed, its jaws locking onto Mina's side before its body wrapped around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake's coils tightened, forcing the air from her lungs. The water became violent, choppy, as Mina fought against the snake, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children ran as fast as they could back to the village, screaming for help. It took several minutes for the men to grab their long knives and run to the river. By the time they reached the river bend, the snake was still moving around in the water, but had pulled Mina deeper under. The men went in and cut at the python over and over until it finally let her go. When they pulled her onto the muddy riverbank, she had clearly been underwater for several minutes. Her skin was cold and pale, her lips a deep blue. The villagers tried pressing on her chest and blowing air into her mouth, while others stood back in shocked silence. When they pressed on her chest, water came out of her mouth and nose, mixing with the mud under her head. Someone recorded the desperate scene with a phone. The sound of shouting and rushing water mixed with the noise of long knives hitting the snake's body. Their efforts continued for several minutes, but there was no sign that she was breathing. Mina's body was placed on a mat near the water as the villagers gathered in silence. For weeks afterward, the river bend remained empty. Fishermen refused to throw their nets there, calling the area cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers, especially during times when wild animals were more likely to come near human areas, looking for water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. It was June 10, 2013, in Sweetwater, Texas. The fairground was extremely hot under a clear sky. Heat rose off the tarps and metal bleachers, turning what should have been a routine demonstration into a day where small mistakes would have serious consequences. Samuel "Sammy" Price was 38 years old and had been a volunteer snake handler at the annual rattlesnake roundup since he was a child. He did repair work around town and showed up every year to handle snakes for visitors. People respected him because There's a particular kind of tragedy when someone with experience falls victim to a danger they understood so well. I think about Sammy, a seasoned snake handler at a rattlesnake roundup. He knew the risks, taught the volunteers, and always took his time. He understood that experience could minimize the danger. But that year, the festival was bigger, the schedule tighter. He skipped breakfast, felt tired from the heat, but kept working, kept demonstrating. The roundup used shallow pits, temporary barriers, a raised platform, fried food, car exhaust, dust. Shade cloths were available, but the layout was cramped. Volunteers were in the sun, and the handlers had limited space to move. Western diamondbacks, you see, are strong. 4 to 5 feet long, Their venom causes tissue damage, bleeding, shock. A large adult can strike with surprising reach. Stress them and they twist, change their grip, expose skin. Even skilled handlers get bitten when a snake is upset, overheated, or handled too much. Earlier that day, organisers had warned about taking turns, limiting heavy handling in the heat. A small accident had prompted them to remind everyone to take breaks, drink water. Medical personnel were standing by with IV fluids, anti-venom. Sammy heard, agreed, but the crowd, the schedule, drew him back. He took a heavy diamondback from a colleague, stepped into the pit with his glove and hook. He lifted the snake, a practiced motion. The crowd relaxed. Sammy's presence was calming. But the snake shifted under stress, twisted sharply. It lunged, its fangs piercing the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled he was quick, but his face turned red, sweat formed. He kept talking to the crowd for several minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite area swelled quickly. Discoloration spread down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling moved past his elbow, toward his shoulder, the skin darkening with bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent when he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied press, started IV fluids, pushed the first vials of anti-venom. His breathing turned shallow, his skin cold and blotched with bruising. Despite the fast treatment, his blood pressure collapsed. His pulse faded. Witnesses later recalled the frantic attempts to keep him conscious as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. Afterward, friends and fellow handlers organised training sessions. They invited regional medics to review emergency procedures, practice drills. A younger relative of Sammy's began helping at the pits, learning to prioritise taking turns and staying hydrated over putting on a good show. The festival board documented the incident and created a checklist for demonstrations, maximum handling time, required breaks, and a fast evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. It's a reminder, I think, that even expertise can't always overcome circumstance. And then my thoughts drift to a different kind of story. One that unfolded on March 15th, 2016, in the dense rainforests of southeastern Cameroon. Imagine towering mahogany trees stretching endlessly under a humid canopy. Hidden among thick jungle vegetation near the Sangha River, a converted logging camp sat isolated on 50 acres of abandoned concession land. The property had once housed a legitimate primate research station with proper government permits, but those days were long gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer from America, had been operating this facility illegally for 3 years after her research permits expired. What she refused to surrender was Caesar, an 18-year-old western lowland gorilla weighing 375 pounds. Erica's demanding personality and entitled behaviour had made her notorious among local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about wildlife inspections and refused to acknowledge that her research permits had expired. With no formal primate training, she relied entirely on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods she found online. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behaviour as she attempted to discipline Caesar using intimidation tactics. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches at visitors and damaging the reinforced walls of his enclosure. Local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night, and Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for the past 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays. I've seen the reports, read the accounts, and still find it hard to fully grasp the horror of that night. Erica, a woman trying to care for a creature far beyond her capabilities, and Caesar, a magnificent gorilla driven to violence by captivity. The details are gruesome, almost unbearable. Warning signs, they say, had been mounting for months. In Erica's case, it seems her frustration had simply reached a breaking point. Caesar, a western lowland gorilla, one of the most powerful primates on Earth, simply wouldn't go into his night quarters. So, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod and entered his enclosure, a 20x30 FT reinforced pen. A fatal decision, as it turned out. They say his behavior shifted instantly from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 375-pound silverback charged, slamming into her with incredible force. What followed was a scene of unimaginable violence. His hands, his teeth. The reports are graphic. He crushed her fingers, severed her ear, and ultimately fractured her skull. The silverback then sat calmly beside the lifeless body for hours. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning. Cameroonian authorities launched an investigation, and wildlife officials worked to relocate Caesar. The incident sparked debate about the dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It reminds me of another case, one that unfolded along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River. July 22, 2017. The Price family was on their annual camping trip, but this year was different. They had brought along Scout, a mountain cougar cub. Landon Price, the father, had purchased Scout from an exotic animal dealer. He was convinced his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their home, telling neighbors it was simply a large dog breed. It's a chilling thought that cougars, even those raised in captivity, never truly lose their wild instincts. I've read accounts of how their hunting behaviors become even more intense in unfamiliar places, where their sense of territory kicks into overdrive. And that's what I think about when I consider the tragic story of Landon. He made a fatal error, a misjudgment rooted in the belief that Scout, the 3-year-old cougar he was transporting, was somehow domesticated. He opened the transport crate, wanting to let Scout stretch and explore, treating this predator like a large house cat. As Landon's family prepared their fishing gear, Scout emerged, immediately surveying the new territory. His coat perfectly blending with the brush, his yellow eyes methodically scanning, cataloguing every movement and sound. When Landon walked toward the river to fill water containers, Scout's predatory instincts took over. Pupils dilated, he crouched behind a log, muscles coiled. I can almost see the twitch of his tail, the precise calculation of distance and timing. Then, in complete silence, he launched himself, covering 20 feet in a single leap. The cougar struck Landon squarely in the back. Claws, 4 inches long, sank into Landon's shoulders, designed to grip struggling prey. The jaws clamped onto the back of Landon's neck. The canine teeth, evolved for this very purpose, pierced the cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord instantly. Paralysis set in immediately, from the neck down. Landon, face submerged, couldn't move. He drowned within 90 seconds. Scout maintained his grip, driven by millions of years of evolutionary programming. Afterward, the cougar dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush, caching his kill. Sarah, Landon's wife, grabbed their children and rushed them to the safety of their locked truck. They waited there, terrified, for 3 hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the cougar, and wildlife officials worked to capture Scout. The incident reignited the debate about private exotic animal ownership. Another case, equally disturbing, unfolded on September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch in South Texas. The remote property, miles from any neighbor, offered Marcus Ellison the isolation he needed for his dangerous hobby. He'd converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a veterinary technician increasingly worried about their unusual housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer. His desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols led him to spend his money on exotic pets. Luna had grown into a powerful 180-pound predator, but Marcus believed their bond would protect him. Lisa had been pressuring him to surrender Luna to a sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's erratic behavior. Luna had been refusing food for 4 days. She had begun marking territory throughout the house. Her pacing had worn paths in her enclos. Lisa noticed her pupils were constantly dilated, indicating severe stress. Neighbors reported hearing strange vocalizations at night. Jaguars, the third largest big cats, possess the strongest bite force of any feline. They can crush turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. These predators are killing machines. With bodies built for explosive power and jaws capable of exerting over 1,500 pounds of press per square inch. Unlike other big cats, jaguars deliver killing bites through the skull or spine. Even hand-raised jaguars retain their wild instincts. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he entered Luna's enclos without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her food refusal, he believed their bond would allow him to safely investigate. He unlocked the gate to her pen and stepped inside, carrying only a flashlight. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam. She had been waiting. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand, Luna's predatory instincts took over. Her muscles propelled her across the enclos in 2 bounds. Luna's attack was swift. Her body slammed into Marcus's chest. I've always been fascinated by the power of wild instincts, how they can override everything we think we know. Take the story of Luna, the jaguar. She'd been living in captivity, but when Marcus, her caretaker, made a fatal error, those instincts took over with brutal efficiency. Luna's bite force, a staggering 1,500 pounds per square inch, crushed Marcus's windpipe and severed critical arteries in seconds. It's a stark reminder of the inherent dangers of keeping apex predators. The aftermath of Marcus's death led to renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership. His family, in a statement, urged others to learn from their tragic loss, acknowledging the risks involved. Then there's the case of Brianna Ellis, a marine biology student in Homestead, Florida. Her story unfolded on June 14, 2018, in a deceptively peaceful suburban setting. Behind a rental house, she maintained an elaborate backyard pond system, a 40x60 FT artificial habitat that had become home to Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator. Brianna had rescued Brutus 2 years prior from a failing roadside attraction, believing she could provide him with a better environment and study his behavior safely. Her landlord, however, was completely unaware that a 350-pound apex predator was residing in his backyard. The warning signs had been escalating in the month leading up to the tragedy. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times, lunging at the pond's edge whenever anyone approached. Despite her friends' protests, Brianna continued to hand-feed the massive reptile, convinced that her scientific understanding gave her an advantage. Neighbors complained of strange splashing sounds at night, and Brutus had been observed floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behavior. American alligators are among the most efficient predators, perfectly evolved killing machines. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of pres per square inch. Their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball, and their signature death roll technique can dismember prey within seconds. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began to set. She needed to retrieve her pH testing equipment from the deeper section of the pond. Despite suggestions to use a pool net, Brianna insisted on entering the water herself. This decision proved catastrophic, as dusk is the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, Brutus began his approach with the stealth that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. The 350-pound alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, his massive body creating no visible wake as he closed the distance. Brianna bent down to retrieve her submerged equipment, unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, his eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline as he prepared for his explosive assault. The attack came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward and forward in one fluid motion, his massive jaws opening wide to reveal rows of conical teeth. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, and his jaw, press of nearly 3,000 pounds per square inch, crushed her femur bone instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The powerful alligator spun his body rapidly, using his muscular tail for propulsion, creating a whirlpool of churning water and blood. The rotational force generated by his 350-pound body tore Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again with ruthless efficiency, clamping down on her torso. There are moments I've encountered in my research that still haunt me. The story of Brutus, the alligator, is one of those. To think of the relentless determination, holding Brianna underwater until her lungs filled. It's a chilling example of raw instinct. The dive team recovered only scattered remains. Brutus retreated to the deepest part of the pond, and officials began investigating the illegal possession of such a dangerous reptile. The incident led to changes in local laws about owning exotic animals in residential areas. Another incident, equally tragic, took place on October 3, 2016, far away in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. It was a remote place, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor. A weathered log cabin sat hidden among the evergreens. This was the home of Sean Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator. His career had ended in disgrace 3 years earlier. Bitter and paranoid, he retreated to this inherited family property after losing his license following an incident with a bear that left him with a permanent limp. Sean shared his sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He'd illegally acquired Kodiak as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming he rescued him from certain death. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs led him to keep Kodiak, despite losing his credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin. But this makeshift arrangement had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions, his mental state deteriorating from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically. Kodiak systematically destroyed the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. He became increasingly aggressive when Sean limited his food, displaying territorial behavior that should have been a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of the doors and windows, repeatedly pushing against them as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful, despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies. Adult males can reach speeds of 30 midsection and possess the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their jaws can exert over 800 pounds of press per square inch, easily crushing human skulls. Their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal, most active during twilight and nighttime hours, when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15 and 20-foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed. He stepped quietly into the room, carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in a deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that makes black bears such effective predators. The bear's nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with those 4-inch claws. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, raking 4 parallel gashes across his rib cage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone, as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the press, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. There's a story that stayed with me long after I first heard it. It happened on the outskirts of Houston, Texas, on a humid spring day. A Bengal tiger named Raja lived in a chain-link enclosure behind a small ranch-style house. His owner, a mechanic, believed he had earned the tiger's trust. He was wrong. The investigation that followed was immediate. Wildlife officials worked to tranquilize and relocate another animal, a black bear named Kodiak, to a proper sanctuary. The date was March 22, 2015. Michael Torres was 41. He worked 6 days a week at a small auto shop off Highway 6. He was known as a patient man who loved tinkering, preferring engines to people. He'd lived alone since his divorce 3 years earlier, spending his free time fixing up old cars and tending to the animals he collected. It started with ball pythons and iguanas, then a serval, and finally Raja, a 6-year-old male Bengal tiger he had acquired through a private breeder outside San Antonio. He kept the tiger in a large fenced enclosure on his property, reinforced with corrugated steel and heavy wire. Neighbors occasionally saw him through the fence, walking beside the tiger on a chain lead, talking to it like a companion. He believed Raja recognized his scent and tone. He even claimed the animal would never hurt him. When asked by a friend why he took such risks, he would shrug and say it was about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon was overcast and sticky. The enclosure smelled of straw and damp soil. A friend, Luis Alvarez, had stopped by to borrow a socket wrench and lingered, watching as Michael carried tools toward the cage. Raja was pacing more than usual, tail lashing, eyes following every movement. Construction noise from a nearby property had carried through the air all morning, metal clanging, machinery humming. Michael said the tiger didn't like loud sounds, but would settle once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers are apex predators, capable of crushing bone with a bite exceeding 1,000 lb of pres. Even those raised from cubs retain the same hunting reflexes, stalking, ambushing, and using sudden bursts of force to subdue prey. Male tigers can weigh more than 400 libbt and strike with enough power to shatter ribs. Their attacks rarely involve warning growls. Movement itself is often the trigger. Luis stood about 20 yards away, leaning against the fence while Michael opened the inner gate. He was replacing old straw, raking droppings into a bin. For convenience, he left the outer gate partially open so he could move a wheelbarrow through more easily. It wasn't the first time he'd done it. Luis mentioned that as he worked, Raja continued pacing, muscles tensing with each pass along the fence. Michael glanced up once, muttered something under his breath, and bent again to lift a shovel. Luis later told investigators he saw the tiger freeze mid-stride. Its ears flattened, body crouched low to the ground, tail twitching rapidly. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact made a hollow sound, metal and flesh colliding. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him flat on his back. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja followed in 2 strides and clamped its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Luis shouted and threw a wrench that clattered uselessly off the fencing. Michael swung the shovel's handle upward, striking Raja's snout once, but the tiger's jaws tightened. Luis grabbed handfuls of gravel and hurled them, screaming for the tiger to stop. But Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body by the shoulder until it was half under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. Dispatchers logged the call at 5:42 p.m. When deputies arrived 10 minutes later, they held position until animal control arrived with tranquilizer rifles. But when Raja charged the fencing, one officer fired his service rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body showed extensive trauma, massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm had been partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable from the first strike. Investigators noted that despite his experience, he had no secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister handled arrangements quietly, declining interviews. His funeral was attended by fewer than 20 people. Neighbors left flowers at the fence. The straw inside was still stained dark where the attack happened. Then there's another case, this one from January 14th, 2016. In Surabaya, Indonesia. The morning air hung heavy with humidity. The sounds of the city were still distant beyond the industrial edges of the port. Behind a low row of warehouses, one lot stood apart, quiet except for the occasional clank of metal and the faint scrape of claws against concrete. Within those walls, a private experiment in control was nearing its inevitable breaking point. Ahmad Firdos was 34, an auto parts importer who had built a modest business supplying components to repair shops across East Java. To most who knew him, he was patient and meticulous, the kind of man who stayed late to sort invoices or fix a broken compressor himself. But his fascination with exotic animals was no secret. Years earlier, During a trip to Flores, he had been captivated by the Komodo dragon. Its slow, deliberate movements, the quiet dominance in its stare. When an acquaintance from the wildlife trade offered him a hatchling, Ahmad accepted, paying in cash and never telling his family. Over the next 2 years, the reptile grew from a curious pet into a formidable presence. The pen Ahmad built behind his warehouse was solid, thick steel mesh reinforced with concrete. I've seen the aftermath of these encounters, the blood staining the concrete, the shock in the eyes of those who were there. It's a chilling reminder that even with the best intentions, the wild remains wild. Ahmad, in Indonesia, had raised a Komodo dragon from a hatchling. He fed it, cared for it, and believed it knew him. But one Thursday morning, that trust shattered. The dragon hadn't been fed the previous evening, and its water basin was overturned. As Ahmad entered the enclosure to clean it, the animal, capable of crushing bone with its bite and delivering venom that causes rapid blood loss, was waiting. Yudi, a worker in the warehouse, heard the clang of metal and a cry. He found Ahmad on the ground, the dragon's teeth sunk into his calf. The dragon released its grip only to lunge again, clamping down on Ahmad's forearm, shaking loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole and struck the dragon, but it was too late. The dragon attacked again, this time catching Ahmad's side, tearing through skin and tissue. Yudi continued to strike the animal until it finally backed off. Ahmad slumped to the ground, the concrete beneath him stained dark red. He was gone before emergency responders arrived. The Komodo dragon, obtained through illegal trade, was sedated and taken to a wildlife rehabilitation center. The story was quickly buried beneath other news, but within the warehouse community, it served as a quiet warning that even a seemingly misunderstood companion could still see you as prey. It reminds me of another incident, this one in Montana. It was May 30th, 2014, near Bozeman. Mark Jennings, a former wildlife handler, had built an animal sanctuary. His pride was Bruno, a 1,000 lb brown bear he'd raised from a cub. Mark believed he had proven that wild animals could bond with humans through trust. Bruno had been with him for nearly 12 years, intelligent and typically calm around people he knew. But even with all that history, the inherent risks remained. I've always found it haunting how quickly things can turn, how a normal morning can become a nightmare in a matter of seconds. I remember reading the official report on this case, and the sheer speed of the attack is what struck me most. The sanctuary sat on rolling pasture bordered by pines. It was early summer, strong sunlight, restless animals. The air carried the smell of hay and meat from the storage shed. That morning, the enclos were quiet, except for the sound of pacing claws and the creak of metal gates. Aaron arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal. 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark had left town the previous evening to visit his sister in Helena. Before leaving, he reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, he texted her around 10 a.m., receiving no reply. He assumed she was busy, then began his drive back. When he pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to the bear enclosure was half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming from beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, the claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently. The bear adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclosure. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Mark's shouting, "Stop!" Abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbor who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. Then there's the case from August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp, and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Boer's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive, and Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Jan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Jan would lead them into the outer section of the enclave for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation, mixed with business. To staff, Jan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Jan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early and told Jan that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Jan brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Jan took a broom and bucket toward the enclave, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. There are moments I've encountered in my research that still haunt me. The death of Jan in October of 2013 is one of those moments. It wasn't a sudden accident, but a slow-motion tragedy fueled by complacency. I've seen the footage, recorded casually as Jan approached the gate. Inside the enclave, Simba, the lion, stopped pacing. His ears perked forward, his body low to the ground. Jan entered through the inner gate, closing it behind him, but leaving the outer one slightly ajar. He began sweeping near the feeding platform, speaking softly as he worked. The worker continued filming, clearly fascinated by Jan's calmness. A few moments passed without incident. Then Simba began circling, his tail flicking sharply. According to the video and interviews with witnesses, Simba's behavior changed rapidly. He lowered his head, crouching, and then he lunged. The impact knocked Jan forward onto the dirt, the broom clattering away. Simba's jaws clamped around his shoulder, driving him down. Jan yelled and pushed against the lion's muzzle with his free arm, but Simba shifted his grip, his teeth sinking into the back of Jan's neck. The sound of deep growling overpowered Jan's cries. Simba dragged Jan several feet toward the shade structure, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Jan tried rolling onto his back, kicking at the animal's chest, but the lion's weight crushed his ribs. The broom handle snapped as he tried to wedge it between them. Another employee ran toward the gate with a bucket, throwing water over the fence, but it only startled Simba for a second. Jan's voice faltered into short, gurgled gasps. Simba then lunged again, biting into his throat. The motion was efficient and final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Jan's body went limp. The growls faded into rhythmic breathing. One worker ran to the control hut, slamming the gate alarm that signaled an animal emergency. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers arrived within minutes, tranquilizer rifles ready. they found Simba standing over Yan's body. When the lion turned toward them, shoulders low and tail flicking, they fired 2 darts into his flank. Simba flinched, growled, and backed several steps before collapsing beside Yan. Once Simba was confirmed sedated, the team pulled Yan's body free, using a canvas stretcher, his clothing torn and soaked through with blood. The autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite movements and tissue analysis confirmed a single sustained attack consistent with defensive predation rather than aggression. The lodge was closed the same week. Simba was euthanized humanely after sedation, and his remains were sent to a veterinary pathology lab in Pretoria for examination. Officials classified the incident as preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocol. Yan's wife sold the property soon after, and the lion enclose was sealed for good. It was October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Birds moved between the trees along the edge of the Reeves property. Behind the modest brick house, 2 large cages stood under a tin awning, built strong but weathered, their bars streaked with rust. Inside, 2 chimpanzees made sharp and uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician who had worked most of her life at a local medical research facility. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. After retiring early, she poured her savings into building an enclosure for 2 young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 lb, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are strong beyond proportion, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 lb, their jaws capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1/200 lb per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. That Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. On that day, Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclosure. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty pan hoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. Linda. I still can't shake the image from my mind. A bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark. Even a hose couldn't wash everything away. It was the sight of something that defied understanding, a bond broken in seconds, turning fatal. It happened on April 17th, 2015, just outside Chicago, Illinois. A bright, warm afternoon. Yellow school buses pulling into the parking lot of a small private animal park. You know the kind. A roadside zoo. The paint fading on its signs, rust showing through the old fences. Families with strollers, school groups with packed lunches. Teachers trying to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. The chimpanzee exhibit sat near the middle of the park, behind a low chain-link railing and a shallow moat lined with algae. A hand-painted sign read, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside the enclosure lived 2 adult males and 1 younger female, among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture stains, and the whole enclosure felt outdated compared to the modern habitats you see in larger, accredited zoos. Matthew Collins was 12 years old, a 6th grader on a spring field trip. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse. His father operated a forklift at a local warehouse. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. His teachers described him as bright but impulsive, the kind of boy who liked to climb trees, rooftops, anything taller than himself. At the park, he carried a second-hand digital camera he'd saved for. His plan was simple: get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing while their teacher gave instructions. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera, but couldn't get a clear view past the others. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance. A few classmates noticed and motioned for him to stop. He ignored them, focused on his shot, and leaned forward. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in the frame, his foot slipped. A few students gasped as his arms windmilled for balance. Then he dropped over the rail and into the pit below. He landed hard on his right side, rolling onto his stomach with a groan. From above, teachers screamed his name. A few kids started crying. For a moment, the enclosure was silent, except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then one of the males, an older broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors who were close enough later said the sounds were chilling. Deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The two chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite. It was a dominance blow. A sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite. A hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in from the other side, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclosure heard the commotion and ran toward the enclosure, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit. The high-press stream broke the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the two chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt and retreated. There are moments in my work as an archivist when I come across stories that simply refuse to be neatly filed away. They cling to the edges of the folders, demanding to be told. The case of Belinda Holmes and her chimpanzee Charlie is one of those stories. It serves as a stark reminder of the unpredictable power of nature and the dangers of blurring the lines between the wild and the domestic. I remember reading the initial police report, the stark details sending a chill through me. It was June 11th, 2014, in Stamford, Connecticut. An afternoon, ordinary in almost every way, was about to shatter into something horrific. Houses lined Rockledge Drive, each with trimmed lawns and neat porches. But inside one of those homes, something was very, very different. Belinda Holmes, a 57-year-old woman, lived there with a male chimpanzee named Charlie. She'd acquired him as an infant years earlier, disregarding state laws that forbade private ownership of such animals. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, even driving him around in her car. Neighbors often saw her walking him on a leash. She treated him like family, defending him against anyone who dared express concern. But there were warning signs, weren't there always? Charlie had grown large. By age 12, he weighed over 120 pounds. Belinda struggled to control him when he became upset, yet she insisted he was gentle, misunderstood. The house itself bore witness to years of cohabitation with a wild animal. Furniture was scratched, damaged from his climbing. The air, the report said, often carried the scent of animal musk. On that June day, the weather was warm, the windows were open. Charlie, restless, paced and made noise while Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks. But years of living in a human household couldn't erase his natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can surface suddenly, with a violence that familiarity simply cannot prevent. Months earlier, A neighbour had called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard. He chased cars, pounded on a vehicle, before Belinda managed to bring him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie was becoming irritable around strangers. Still, Belinda insisted he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm, and in seconds the situation spiraled into unimaginable violence. Charlie lunged, slamming Belinda backward onto the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. I'll never forget the story of Belinda. The screams, they said, would stay with them forever. She survived the attack, but her life was irrevocably altered. Multiple surgeries couldn't fully repair the damage, leaving her disfigured and in need of constant care. The case ignited a national debate about the profound dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. In response, Connecticut lawmakers enacted stricter regulations, banning private chimpanzee ownership altogether. The house, forever marked by the tragedy, was eventually sold, its new owners forever aware of its dark history. Then there's the incident that occurred on May 28, 2017, near the Colorado River, just outside Austin, Texas. A few families had gathered for a Memorial Day barbecue at a rented picnic site, a quiet grassy area shaded by live oaks and bordered by the open water. Cars lined the dirt access road, children played near the grills, and the afternoon heat shimmered off the river. One guest brought an animal more commonly seen behind glass. The victim was Daniel Ortiz, a 36-year-old high school track coach. He frequented the trails most weekends and often met friends for cookouts. Known for his reliability, Daniel was the type to bring extra water and sunscreen. That day, he'd finished a 5-mile run and stopped by the barbecue after a friend's text. Drawn by curiosity, he noticed the small crowd near the tables. Daniel felt comfortable around animals. He volunteered at a local shelter, helping calm, anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept a respectful distance, staying behind a trash can. The chimp wore a harness, and the owner spoke with onlookers while handing out fruit. Daniel wanted a photo to show his students proof of the strange thing he'd seen. He moved a few feet forward, angling for a clear shot. The chimp paced in a small circle on its leash, sniffing the air and reaching for anything too close. A thin musk drifted downwind, mixing with the charcoal smoke. Adult male chimpanzees are not suited for public gatherings. Dominance in their social groups is enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling don't erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, and food competition can trigger them in seconds. A city ordinance banned exotic animals within Austin, but this site was just beyond city limits. Few realized the handler lacked the proper permits. A couple stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler holding a red cup. The owner shortened the leash, but kept feeding it fruit. A runner called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, and waited for the chimp to settle. The tension increased. Children clustered too close, then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry from a paper plate and grunted, eyes fixed on moving hands. The owner tugged the leash, which had slackened around his wrist. Daniel stepped closer, maybe 2 feet, to avoid someone's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled toward the movement. For a moment, everything held still except the wind. The lunge covered the gap in a blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. The phone flew from his grip, skidding across the dirt. The first bite hit his forearm, tearing skin and muscle. Daniel stumbled backward onto the edge of a blanket, trying to pull free. The chimp's grip did not loosen. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams rose from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him on his side. Daniel tried to roll, but the chimp climbed up his torso and hammered his shoulder with fists. The leash tangled with the owner's legs, causing him to fall. The leash slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, soaking the corner of a blanket and streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed. A man kicked at the chimp's hip, but the chimp swung one arm and knocked him off balance. Another tried to shove the animal with a folding chair. The chimp ducked and landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds were awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks from the animal, and short grunts from Daniel every time teeth met bone. A woman dragged 2 children backward as the owner crawled toward the leash, hands shaking. The attack slowed when the owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest and pull it toward a picnic table leg, creating a brief barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite to the wrist broke a bone. Bystanders threw bottles and tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing worked. Emergency calls went out, but the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay a few feet away, motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that haunted the air. I remember the details of that day so clearly. It was September 14th, 2018, in Los Angeles. A seemingly simple animal demonstration for a daytime talk show turned into a nightmare. A chimpanzee, brought in for the shoot, had been trained for years, but the press of the studio environment proved to be too much. What followed was a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of wild animals and the devastating consequences that can arise when we forget that. Kevin Harris, an experienced animal trainer, had built his career on patience, working small contracts across California, school assemblies, local commercials, small TV projects. This talk show appearance was just another paycheck, another chance to promote his business. The chimp, Mike, had been with Kevin since infancy. Mike, at 13 years old and 125 pounds, was fully mature, strong, intelligent, and, crucially, unpredictable when stressed. Kevin often said Mike knew the rhythm of production life, that he could stay calm under noise and movement. But handlers familiar with chimps knew the truth. Adulthood changes everything. Males that once tolerated crowds often grew volatile once dominance instincts sharpened with age. The set was modest. A sofa, coffee table, painted backdrop under hot studio lamps. Mike sat on a low stool beside Kevin, wearing only a light collar and leash. He shifted constantly, tugging at the strap, scanning the unfamiliar faces. Before cameras rolled, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing clear stress behaviors: pacing, baring teeth, tugging sharply on the lead. But the director insisted they proceed. The schedule was tight, and the sunlight was already shifting. Kevin re-asked everyone it was fine, offering Mike small pieces of banana to settle him. The tension seemed to fade, at least for the moment. As recording began, the room brightened. The host smiled for the opening shot, reading lines about wildlife awareness. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave, a trick they'd rehearsed countless times. For a few seconds, everything worked. Then the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow that swept across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. Shoulders hunched, lips curled. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin turned toward him, voice low, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch broke the balance. The chimp lunged sideways. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward, the stool clattering across the floor. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room filled with noise, shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment tipping over. A sound technician stumbled into a light stand. Someone yelled to cut the power. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm just below the elbow. The bite tore muscle and tendons clean through. Blood sprayed across the carpet as Kevin twisted, trying to free himself. The chimp released and struck again. Another bite to the shoulder. Another blow with his fists. The host ran off set. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod to break the attack, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The impact cracked one of the camera housings. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical. Each sound matched to a strike or bite. Kevin's movements slowed. His left arm hung limp. A second crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray clouded the air, coating the floor in white dust. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in, one man carrying another extinguisher, another holding a collapsible baton. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He reared back. The second spray pushed him farther away from Kevin, who lay motionless on the floor. Animal control officers arrived within minutes, summoned by the studio's emergency call. They tranquilized Mike on sight, the dart striking his shoulder as he bared his teeth. He staggered briefly before collapsing beside the toppled couch, eyes fluttering. Kevin survived, but barely. Paramedics stabilized him before rushing him to a trauma center. Surgeons later documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down indefinitely. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. Then, some months later, it was October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortale Highway in western Uganda. The two-lane road curved through steep forested hillsides. It was a lifeline between towns, but for wildlife, it had become a dangerous crossing. Martin Blake, a 48-year-old American wildlife photographer, was traveling alone. He had spent 2 weeks documenting primates in East Africa and wanted one last series of images before flying home. Known for chasing difficult shots, he often ventured off marked trails to capture animals in unusual settings. That morning, he drove west out of Fortale and stopped where the highway cut clean through forest slopes. He had heard stories of chimpanzees. "I've always been drawn to the intersection of human ambition and the raw power of the natural world. Sometimes that ambition leads to tragedy." A few years ago, a photographer named Martin ventured into a protected forest, seeking a unique shot of chimpanzees against the backdrop of a mountain road. He had photographed gorillas before, and perhaps that gave him a false sense of security. He parked, slung his camera, and started walking. A local motorbike rider shouted a warning, gesturing towards the trees, but Martin waved him off. He seemed more concerned with the speeding trucks than the animals themselves. The highway sliced through the green ridges, walls of vegetation pressing close. Chimpanzees sometimes appeared along these margins, crossing embankments and ditches. Rangers at the visitor centre routinely warned tourists to stay inside their vehicles. Truck drivers had reported seeing chimps near bends where fruit trees grew close to the road. Locals avoided walking there alone, especially in the morning. Martin had been told all of this at his lodge the night before, but he dismissed the warnings, reasoning that he had worked safely around gorillas under stricter conditions. Just a few minutes into his walk, he spotted movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge. 2 smaller chimps lingered behind him. Martin raised his camera, crouching for a clear shot. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept clicking, zooming in, stepping forward, unaware that the chimp had begun to descend. It took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt, closing the gap on all 4s. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging. The impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding away. The chimp seized his left arm, dragging him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite tore into his forearm. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps reappeared briefly, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes, biting his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were brutal. Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel. The assault lasted only a few minutes, but it felt far longer to the witnesses before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released him and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and Martin was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to keep press on his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images: the forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.